to propose the motion in the wake of events over recent weeks, and particularly over the weekend and recent days. We do so to condemn and offer our solidarity to all those who have been impacted by this racism and violence, and we also want to look forward at what we need to do to tackle the underlying issues which it surfaces. I want to speak mainly in my capacity as an MLA and leader of the Alliance Party, but I do want to finalise some comments as the Minister of Justice. I want to begin, first of all, by condemning absolutely and unequivocally the reprehensible events of the last number of weeks in Antrim and more acutely over the weekend in Belfast and further afield. The actions of a small and violent minority are motivated by a desire to foment hate and division and should be highlighted for what it is: fear-mongering and intimidation at the highest level. Let me say clearly, there is no place in our society for hate, for xenophobia, for racism, for Islamophobia that we have seen on the streets over recent weeks and days. My thoughts are with all of those impacted in this targeted violence and intimidation, and I'd like to say specifically to all those feeling fearful and anxious as a result of what they have seen and experienced over recent days, we stand with you. This violent minority do not represent the people of Northern Ireland. We do in this chamber, and we speak for you as well as for them. I also want to send my thanks to the police officers who have had to respond to the violence and give my best wishes for a speedy recovery to those who have been injured in the line of duty. I'll return to the issue of policing later in my remarks. The most recent unrest we have seen in towns and cities across the UK was, on the face of it, a retaliation to an abhorrent knife attack in Southport. I think I speak for all my colleagues and those from other parties when I say my thoughts are with all those children and their families who were attacked, and my deepest condolences go to the families of the 3 little girls who were murdered: Elsie Stankham, Alice de Silva Aguilar and Baby King. Their loss is unspeakable. In the hours following that attack, false media claims about the perpetrator amplified on social media. The Guardian reported there were at least 27 million impressions of posts on Twitter alone that stated or speculated the suspected attacker was Muslim, a migrant, a refugee or a foreigner. Despite the pleas of the families of those girls for the unrest to stop, their anguish and pain is being exploited by those who are behind these riots. What we're witnessing is a form of radicalisation of people online through disinformation and outright lies propagated by far-right and white supremacist elements, both domestic and international, and it is incredibly dangerous. While people have a right to an opinion when it comes to issues such as immigration, as with any other issue, it needs to be an informed opinion. There have been suggestions from some that this violence is a result of people with genuine concerns about immigration and who were seeking to legitimately protest. Firstly, these demonstrations, as they were advertised, were never intended to be either legitimate or lawful. From the outset, they intended to intimidate and threaten. They intended to break the law on public processions and to block roads. And I believe that they intended to create violence and unrest. Their call for women and children to stand to the front was, in my view, a clear attempt to use them as human shields when violence actually started. They were not, in my view, ever intended to be legitimate. They are hate marches. However, I want to speak beyond those to those people who are genuinely confused, frightened or even angry about immigration, to those who believe that immigrants and asylum seekers are the cause of their own hardship. They are not. Your anger is misdirected. Lack of investment by the last government in public services and housing are the cause, and by taking out your frustrations on others because of their ethnicity, religion, skin colour or more scarce resources are being wasted, and you are being manipulated by far-right groups and social media fakery. As political leaders, it is our role to counter, not amplify, division and disinformation. If you have genuine concerns in our community, raise it with us as your local MLAs. We must also collectively be clear, however, that there is no excuse ever for taking to the streets to intimidate others and create havoc in our community. Some of the people who have been the target of violence in Belfast are only here because they have experienced hardship and abuse that most of us can barely imagine in their home country. They are here to build a better life and to contribute constructively to society. They are here seeking safety and deserve to live in peace. Others, however, are long-standing members of our community, many second and third generation, who have built businesses, created employment opportunities and provided services to our community for longer than some of the rioters have been alive. We need to ask ourselves honestly as a society, how long before someone is accepted as being part of our community? How many generations need to have passed before they are fully accepted and welcomed? And if they continue to be othered because of the colour of their skin, their religion or their ethnicity, then let's be clear, that is racism. It is xenophobia. It is Islamophobia. And that is not and cannot ever be legitimate, and we need to work collectively as political leaders to combat it. And I want to make some remarks as Justice Minister. Obviously, I was horrified to hear media reports of a man who was attacked in the street on Monday and who is now in a serious condition in hospital after his attacker stamped on his head. I want to send my very best wishes to that man for a speedy recovery. Police say they are treating this incident as a hate crime. Just before recess, I also spoke to the Assembly about my determination to expedite progress on updating our hate crime legislation and strengthening the protections we offer to victims of hate crime. Those recommendations from Judge Marnin's independent review of hate crime legislation in 2020 have provided that impetus for this work. The implementation of these recommendations will make a real and tangible difference for victims of racist hate crimes. The loss of 2 years of Assembly business and the constraint on resources in the Department and the wider justice system has restricted the range of legislative reforms possible in the remainder of this mandate. However, despite those challenges, I am determined that foundational new hate crime legislation provisions will be in place by the end of the mandate. I hope I can rely on the support of colleagues here today in progressing those reforms, which I believe will offer significant assurance and shift the dial on our hate crime response and indeed the conversations in this space. I intend to make a statement in the Assembly setting out the details of my intention following summer recess. The PSNI have had a very difficult task in policing the complex and rapidly evolving events of the last few days. I know that work is ongoing to bring those involved to justice and that they will face the full force of the law. There have already been 16 arrests and 11 people have been charged, and that number is due to rise in the coming days. I have also been aware of work being done with An Garda Síochána to identify those who cross the border to engage in riots in Belfast at the weekend, and I want to thank Minister McEntee for engaging with me on these issues earlier this week. I visited the Belfast Islamic Centre yesterday to hear from some of those affected by this, and I heard very clearly that people have lost confidence in the police, and that concerns me. When I say that lessons will have to be learned, one of those is how to restore that trust and confidence, and I want to pay tribute to the Chief Constable and his officers for the work they are already doing to address those concerns. As I've said many times, policing and justice have not been this stretched since devolution in 2010. Though the total Northern Ireland Block grant has increased by 53% in the last 13 years, DOJ has seen just under 13% growth in budget allocation. Policing makes up around 65% of our budget and so has endured the same sustained and profound squeeze. I say this to demonstrate that there are consequences of these past decisions, some of which were made when the Northern Ireland Block grant was in a much better state than it is today. We know that despite the comparative investment, the health service and education system are still not in a good place. Whilst there are, in my view, structural changes required that partially can deal with this, it is clear that the effects on policing and justice of being actively starved of investment have never really received the same public attention. My colleagues and I have fought for years to highlight the risk in underfunding public services and justice, although sadly it has brought little to the table. But no one could claim to be surprised at the backlog in our courts, that our prisons are full and that our police service is at its lowest ever number of officers. The effect of these numbers in policing, amongst other things, is a lack of resilience. Services get scaled back, particularly work in neighbourhood policing. And when there is a crisis such as unrest as the scale we have witnessed over the past week, it is incredibly hard to manage. I therefore met the Secretary of State on Monday evening and again yesterday morning and was clear that policing needs access to the additional resources and support available to England and Wales during the current unrest and beyond. I also want to welcome and thank the Finance Minister, who has been clear in highlighting the need for further investment in public services across Northern Ireland and continues to fight on behalf of the Executive for the proper funding of our public services, and I continue to support those efforts on behalf of policing and justice. In closing, Mr Speaker, I make two appeals. Firstly, anyone with information about those involved or other planned disturbances, please bring that forward to the police and support us in bringing those responsible to justice. My second appeal, Mr Speaker, is for calm. I am appealing to people to step back, to all of those who have influence to continue to seek to calm tensions and show support for and solidarity with those who are suffering most directly and are impacted most profoundly by this violence and hatred. It is not who we are and we cannot allow it to be.
I call Brian Kingston to move the amendment.
Mr Speaker, the Democratic Unionist Party unequivocally condemns the violence and wanton... Sorry, do I need to move the amendment first?
The member takes a seat. You will have 10 minutes to propose and 5 minutes to wind, and all other speakers will have 5 minutes to wind. Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was saying, the Democratic Unionist Party unequivocally condemns the violence and wanton destructions witnessed on the streets of Belfast and elsewhere over recent days. Our message to those responsible for organising, taking part, or inciting this disorder is simple: stop, and stop now. Our thoughts and prayers are with all those impacted personally by this unacceptable wave of criminality. Every business person whose premises have been destroyed or damaged, their livelihood uprooted. Every innocent person assaulted, injured, or feeling fearful. Every police officer who put themselves in harm's way to hold the line against rioters. No one should have to live in fear because of where they were born, the colour of their skin, or their religious beliefs. The targeting of homes, businesses, and places of worship, including our mosques, is and always has been absolutely wrong. Let us be clear from the outset: anyone who perpetuates such attacks while citing love of crown and country is deeply misguided. Civil and religious liberty is and always has been a cornerstone of our United Kingdom. Every July, as Unionists, we celebrate and commemorate the defence of this principle in times past. It is something that our ancestors fought and died for. Yet those who resort to racist and sectarian acts of violence only serve to besmirch their memory. Northern Ireland has a proud history of welcoming those who seek a better lives for themselves and their families, and who have enriched our communities socially and economically. That will not change. It is abhorrent that some of our most dedicated health professionals have felt compelled to consider leaving Northern Ireland as a result of recent events. Without their contribution, it is no exaggeration to say that our health service and other essential provision would collapse. Yesterday, at the end of a day of meetings and interviews, I met with 3 care assistants from the Philippines living in the Woodvale and Ballygomartin area and working in a North Belfast care home. They have been here for some years. They get on well with their neighbours, but they are now concerned for their safety after recent events. I assured them that I believed there was no threat to their safety and left them my mobile number. It is appalling that they, along with many others contributing to our society, suddenly feel unsafe in a way that they did not before. I also listen to the concerns raised by residents every day, including on recent evenings when I have been on the streets. Concern about difficulty in accessing local housing, in particular social housing, the level of private sector rents, concerns about antisocial behaviour, and so on. People will have differing views on the extent to which migration to Northern Ireland, both regular and irregular, has led to pressures we face. Of course, there are other factors at play, not least the chronic underfunding of our public services. However, if we want to get to the root of this problem, there needs to be a recognition by all that individuals have the right to lawfully express those concerns, including through engaging in peaceful protest. However, it is clear to me also that some people are pushing these issues to direct anger specifically at foreign nationals living in our community. That is disgraceful. It is depressing to see that anger and hate, which is causing fear for many people, in particular for foreign nationals who live and work in our community, including in our care homes, health service, local businesses and services. I appeal to people not to be exploited by those with a racist agenda. Unfortunately, we see a lot of incitement on social media, which people should be wise to. Yes, we'll give way.
The member for giving way. Does the member agree with me that today is the opportunity for us to send that strong and collective message that violence is wrong, disorder is unacceptable, and we utterly reject racism? The challenges within our communities are real. But that is a responsibility for all of us to tackle, including access to affordable housing. We will listen to communities. We must listen to communities and get our policies right. But does he agree that those burning, destroying and rioting, attacking our police officers are doing nothing but destroying their own communities? And we stand absolutely united against that today.
I thank the member for that contribution, and she's absolutely right. We must stand against violence and intimidation, and we must address also issues within local communities that people wish to raise, and we will do that on an ongoing basis. But that should never be used as a justification for violence or attacks. We recognise also that as the majority of those who participated in protests last weekend did so without malicious intent and took part in no criminality. Many of those protests did not make the news. We are disappointed that some parties have labelled all participants as racists or fascists. However, we also fully accept that with fundamental freedoms comes responsibility. I would implore anyone thinking of joining a public demonstration in the coming days to think carefully about whether their attendance could give succour to those criminal elements who wish to undermine the rule of law. That includes those who wish to abuse protests to create mayhem and exploit young people from the shadows. In the same way that wrecking your own community is entirely counterproductive to securing investment in it, political leaders who ignore genuinely held concerns of protesters take us further away from a solution, not closer to it. The DUP wants to see meaningful dialogue with communities throughout Belfast and indeed throughout our province, and that is what we are engaged in day and daily. Violence is never justified, nor should it be an excuse for public bodies or politicians to run away from the problems and do nothing. We commend the professionalism of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, whose officers stood in the gap to confront the thugs intent on wreaking havoc and to protect those businesses and premises under threat of attack. This remains a very fast-moving situation, and it is to the credit of every officer that the service was able to respond effectively and that they were visible on the streets of our capital city. The police investigation into this disorder and arrest should be evidence-led wherever that leads. As police forces in England and Wales receive offers of additional specialist support, the PSNI is working minor miracles to uphold the law with dwindling resources and record low numbers of police officers. We cannot reverse the neglect of policing budgets under the watch of successive justice ministers overnight. However, it is vital that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, working closely with executive ministers, urgently examines what additional support can be provided to the Chief Constable and his officers in the coming days. We cannot ignore the fact that events on the streets of Belfast have also been part of a spate of violence seen nationally across the UK. There's also been societal unrest in Dublin and other parts of the Republic of Ireland. If we are to stop this from happening again, it will require a collective response from the UK Government and the devolved administrations to forge policies that sustainably address concerns, including around control of our borders. There also needs to be a serious conversation about how we can do more to crack down on those anonymous accounts on social media by malicious individuals who are instrumental in sowing the seeds for violence of this kind, often through misinformation. The authorities should not be left to pick up the pieces because of a failure to crack down on social media platforms which are not doing enough to tackle hate online. As members will have seen, our amendment today takes nothing away from the wording of the original motion, but adds that the right to peaceful protests, including by those who have protested outside Parliament buildings this morning, is a fundamental pillar of any democracy and must be protected. Also, that those who resort to violence and orchestrate public disorder on our streets should face the full rigour of the law, and that we urge the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, working closely with the Executive, to provide additional resources to the Chief Constable in order to maintain an agile and effective police response. We urge the House to accept this amendment. Thank you.
Hargate.
Thank you. I speak today in absolute condemnation and abhorrence at the vile Islamophobic and racist attacks that have occurred in my constituency of South Belfast and other parts of Belfast over the last number of days. Let me firstly be clear that Belfast is a progressive, forward-looking and inclusive city. It's a place I'm proud to call my home and a place which is proudly diverse. The scenes of racist violence, destruction, thuggery and intimidation are disgusting and are not reflective of the Belfast I know and love. On Saturday, I was on the ground alongside activists countering the racist demonstration at City Hall. Later that day, I stood side by side with the proud residents of the Lower Armour Road who stood up and stopped the racist mob from progressing further onto our streets. And I also met later that day with the owners of businesses who were attacked along Botanic and indeed the accommodation housing our refugee and asylum seekers. Lessons can be learned in terms of the policing operation. Mistakes must not be repeated. The priority must be to protect people and property and face down racism, violence and intimidation. But those responsible for what happened over the last number of days are the individuals and groups who whipped up hate online and then came out onto our streets to cause havoc and mayhem, fuelled by Islamophobic and racist hate. These people must now be held accountable for their actions and face the full force of the law. There can be no place for racism, hatred, discrimination or intimidation anywhere within our society. Throughout the last week, I've been on the ground constantly engaging with our minority communities, our businesses, where sporadic violence and attacks have been continuing. People are living in real fear, and you're hearing that on a daily basis. Already we're hearing reports of nurses planning to leave the north in search for a safer location. There are people who work in our hospitals. They are our local shopkeepers, and they're also our local neighbours. The message coming out from this chamber today must be one of unity. No ifs, no buts. Belfast is a proud multicultural city. Hate, racism, discrimination will not be tolerated by its people. It's time for all political parties and community leaders to be unequivocal in their condemnation of this racist Islamophobic violence. No longer can people be allowed to hide from public scrutiny. With one voice today, we say stop. Stop the hate, stop the Islamophobia, stop the racism, stop the hatred and discrimination, and stop the intimidation. We must stand in solidarity with our minority communities, and I will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as one community.
Steve Aiken. We'll have silence in the gallery, please. Steve Aiken.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my party support to both the motions as they come through. Yesterday, I had two very clear examples of the challenges that our society faces and how our very valued migrants are involved. I spent several hours yesterday in Antrim Area Hospital A&E with one of my children. Throughout the hospital, healthcare professionals of many races, religions and nationalities worked assiduously in helping our constituents through their health challenges, including my daughter. The people I saw and talked to from South Antrim in A&E and across the hospital were grateful for the professional medical care that they were receiving. I did not hear one complaint about receiving help from whatever source it came from. I then heard of an attack on the home and car of a healthcare worker in Ballyclare. This despicable attack on somebody who is here in Northern Ireland specifically to help our people is utterly abhorrent. The fact that this person came from a Philippine background is absolutely irrelevant. The fact is, this is a migrant worker who's come to Northern Ireland to help. This very day in my office in Ballyclare, there will be people complaining about the healthcare services, the social services and the rest of it. Yet we also have in our own community people who have come here to help, and some very misguided people think in some way it's appropriate to attack them. It is not. It has to stop. And it has to stop now. The fact that across all of Northern Ireland we rely increasingly on our friends who come in from overseas, who come into Northern Ireland to help us make this a much better place, is something we should all, as politicians, be welcoming. And we need to explain to those who do not understand that this is net benefit to all of us, and we must make this so. But finally, Mr. Speaker, there's one issue, an additional issue I would like to add to this as well. That is the issue of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, in many ways, is the canary in the coal mine for many of the issues that we have had. A year and a half ago, I spoke in the synagogue about what I saw of the concerns of anti-Semitism rising across Northern Ireland and across this island, and the impact that was likely to have. There is no space in Northern Ireland for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, or anything else. We all, as politicians, must call all of these out, and I would like to see the emphasis on anti-Semitism being put there with the other forms of horrific racism that there is there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd first of all like to associate my party with the unequivocal condemnations of the race hate that we've seen on our streets in recent days. I'd also like to welcome members of the Muslim community who are sitting in the chamber today watching us speak. We owe them not just a welcome, we owe them an apology for what they and their community have had to endure in this society and in this city over recent weeks and days. So I say to them, sorry, but also thank you. Thank you for what your community and people of all communities who have come to this society have offered us and continue to offer us every single day. We are in your debt. Mr. Speaker, when I became MLA for South Belfast, I had a choice about where to locate my constituency office. I'm proud that my office is located in the middle of University Street. It's in the heart of one of the most diverse areas of not just this city or this region, but probably of the whole island of Ireland. There are students and academics who study and research at Queen's who enhance and enrich that community. There are medical staff, doctors and nurses working at City Hospital right now to save lives. They were working on last Saturday afternoon to save lives when a racist mob charged through that part of Belfast, destroying property, intimidating them, and seeking to spread their hate. Not only is that unacceptable, it is a profound, profound failure of those people to understand the contribution that migrants make to this society, specifically given the Islamophobic context, those who were campaigning on Saturday. And there, in that part of Belfast, are small businesses owners like Rami Acklet, who has been in Belfast for more than 3 decades and runs his shisha cafe on Lower Botanic Avenue. Rami has contributed jobs, services to that part of Belfast for decades. He has contributed immeasurably more than the hate-filled thugs who rampaged the streets and sought to destroy his business and intimidate him and his customers. So, Mr. Speaker, what do we need to do now? Well, in terms of a response, we need to do 3 broad things. First of all, we need to ensure that there is a robust policing response. It is clear that there are real and profound questions that members of ethnic minority communities, specifically the Muslim community, have over the policing of Saturday's events. It's also clear that there has been a gradual erosion of confidence among members of the Muslim community in the ability of the police to deal with hate crime. Some of that is clearly in the context of depleted resources. But what it means now is the policing response needs to be robust, it needs to be immediate, and there need to be swift prosecutions. So I would like to hear more about what the police is doing, but also how the PPS seeks to bring forward prosecutions swiftly. Secondly, we need robust action from the executive, and I welcome the fact that the executive is meeting today, but we do need to see clear, deliverable actions in coming weeks, months and before the end of this mandate. First of all, we need finally an updated racial equality strategy. We've been waiting nearly a decade for one. If ever there was a moment that proves that we need that updated racial equality strategy, it's now. We also need standalone hate crime legislation, and I welcome the commitment from the Justice Minister to progress that speedily. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, at a national and international level, it's clear that we need robust action on the wild west of social media, those who spew hate on it and those who seek to derive power and influence from those spewing hate. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, we've almost lost sight of how enriching and glorious the increasing diversity of Northern Ireland has been, in part because we're a little bit hung up here on the historic diversity, the historic division that we've inherited. And wasn't it wonderful in recent weeks to see athletes from this place stand proudly under both Aran Naveen and God Save the King as they won medals and did us all proud. It shouldn't be hard to celebrate the new diversity that we have in this society, the new diversity that sees people coming from all over the world to enrich and contribute to this society. They are us. They are us, not the hate-filled yobs who rampaged the streets of my constituency last Saturday. So I say in closing, Mr. Speaker, to the Muslim community and to the wider minority community in Northern Ireland, we aren't just with you, you're us. You're a part of us. You will continue to be part of us. We will defend you and we will support you. Thank you.
Emma Sheeran.
And I'm glad that we stand together today in response to some of the worst days that we have seen in our society recently. And I think it's important that we stand together to send a very strong message that we are united together against hatred, that we are united against racism and Islamophobia, and that we send the message that love and hope will prevail over hate. And that we send a message to the racist thugs who have been attempting to destroy parts of our community over recent days and weeks, that we will not tolerate it, that what you're doing is wrong and that you must stop. It's racist, it's sectarian, it's Islamophobic, and it does not represent the people that we represent here. If we are to take society forward and build a better future for everybody, we must do that. And we must condemn what we've seen. To our ethnic minority communities, I want us to say today that we support you, that we stand with you, that we defend your right to a life free from intimidation and discrimination, that we see your fear and we send solidarity to you, that we value you, that we see the part you play in our society and that you are a part of our society, and we want that to stay that way. You make our society a better place and you are a part of us. Those who incited this violence will not win, and those who have been responsible for criminal behaviour in recent days must be held to account by the PSNA and by our justice system. And there is an onus on us all as leaders in our communities and as elected representatives to stand together and call this out, because discrimination has no place in our society and no one is born with hate in their hearts. It only exists and grows through ignorance and fear and allowing misinformation to win. And when those who know better do not challenge it and do not call it out, then you become compliant in allowing a narrative that is wrong to win out. So we have a responsibility as leaders in our areas to stand together against that and to call it out. And we must send the message today that we are opposed to this and that hope will win out over hate.
Paula Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support today's motion to tell people from all ethnic minority communities now living in Northern Ireland that they are valued, that this is their home as much as anyone else's, and that we will endorse and support the rebuilding that now has to be done. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, that rebuilding goes well beyond the clear-up of destroyed properties and even beyond the restoration of vital businesses. It requires action from political leaders and it requires the rebuilding of trust. There are people who have chosen to make Northern Ireland their home, and who have chosen to contribute to this society who now feel hurt, fearful and isolated. They need reassurance that what we are here today is to provide them with that support regardless of religion, ethnicity or community background. And I would support Steve Aiken's contribution there around including anti-Semitism. Hate is hate. Mr Speaker, I would like to quickly get up to the substantive parts of the motion. In the Racial Equality Strategy 2015-2025, there was a commitment to review the Race Relations Order, which is now 27 years old and entirely out of date. The consultation on the draft order concluded in June 2023, 14 months ago, and yet the official line from the Executive Office is that the report on the responses and feedback is currently under review, and that there is an aim to bring forward updated race relations legislation in 2025-26. Given that its purpose is to provide the best possible legal protections against racism and towards a more equal society, and that it will include provisions for advancing long-awaited ethnic equality monitoring, I would like to hear from the First Minister today if there is any way that this can be brought forward sooner as per the motion. Turning now to the Racial Equality Strategy itself, it is needed to address issues which remain sadly current and even more urgent, such as tackling race hate crime, racist bullying in our schools and ensuring fair employment. The current version was drafted a decade ago, and that makes it rather outdated given how much things have changed in that time period, sadly many for the worse. Mr Speaker, I'd like to hear from the First Minister in outlining what work is being taken within her department to ensure a seamless transition between the current strategy and the next one, and also hear a commitment that this will be developed with the community and voluntary sector, be far-reaching and adequately funded for maximum impact. Turning now to the Refugee Integration Strategy, it is almost 20 years since OFM-DFM first committed to this. Under its current iteration, it was consulted upon in late 2021, early 22, and was meant to run from 2022 to 2027. But due to the political impasse, this has been significantly delayed, and it was the understanding of the Committee for the Executive Office that this should have been signed off in May 24. However, the official position from TEO remains that the revised draft strategy and associated thematic delivery plans will be brought before the Executive, and I quote, in due course. So I would like to hear a firm date from the First Minister today. Mr Speaker, as I said in my opening remarks, we now need to see a period of rebuilding. And as we see this begin, we must reflect today on the vital work of a sector which has for far too long been undervalued. When destruction of this nature arises, we see community groups and voluntary organisations prominent in their response. They offer immediate assistance with clean-ups, they offer support and advice for those impacted, and they continue to act as a consistent voice against racism and division. I would particularly pay tribute to the Belfast Islamic Centre, the Northern Ireland Muslim Family Association and the many other ethnic minority groups operating in South Belfast for their tireless efforts this last week in supporting people impacted by the attacks. Mr Speaker, at least 3 PSNI officers have been injured in the line of duty in this last week. We must never normalise this, and I give thanks for their service, especially those on the front line in South Belfast this last week as well. In closing, Mr Speaker, this is a moment for cohesion in this chamber and for us to speak with a common voice. We all recognise that there's a lot of work to be getting on with, and in reassuring every member of our community that they are valued and that their interests will be protected and promoted on an equal basis. Mr Speaker, what we are saying in this chamber today is that if you attack one member of our community, regardless of creed or colour, you attack all members of our community. And it is on that basis that we start rebuilding. Thank you.
Ms Kimmins.
Corla, and today is an important opportunity for us all to stand together and condemn the horrendous images and attacks we have seen on our migrant communities over the last number of days. And we have to show leadership and ensure that they know that we stand with them and we will do everything we can to protect them going forward. I stand here not just as Sinn Féin Health spokesperson, but as a citizen who sees every single day just how much those people who have come from other countries enrich our society and contribute to our society in so many ways. There are thousands of hard-working international doctors, nurses, surgeons, midwives and many other healthcare professions within our health service who have dedicated and continue to dedicate their lives to our health and well-being. These people have left their home countries, they have left their families and they have left their communities to come here where they are saving lives and providing invaluable care to patients from all backgrounds, bar none. Just 18 months ago, general medicine in my local hospital, Daisy Hill, was at the brink of collapse due to crippling staff shortages. But thankfully, due to the choices made by many overseas workers, healthcare professionals who'd made the choice to come to Ireland and work in our health service, those services have been stabilised and protected, and we must be and are eternally grateful to each and every one of them. The very least people from minority ethnic communities deserve is respect and to have safety and security the same as any other individual across this island. Ireland is the land of Céad Míle Fáilte, and our communities have embraced and welcomed many people from other communities over the years, as many of our people have been welcomed when they have immigrated to countries right across this world. Just yesterday I spoke to some of our international healthcare workers in the Southern Trust area who described the fear they are feeling as they watch on the disgraceful and despicable scenes that we have seen over recent days. They're afraid to go to work, they're afraid to come home, and they're afraid to take their children out in public. Well, I say to you, we stand with you, we value you, and we have the utmost respect for the huge contribution you make to our society every day. This is your home, and you are all welcome here. Racism and hatred is never acceptable. No ifs, no buts, and most importantly, no excuses.
Chambers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it had not been my intention to speak in this debate today, as all that needs to be said has been said eloquently and sincerely by all the previous contributors. I hope that those who feel threatened or just frightened by the disgraceful events of recent days can take some comfort from the support expressed in this chamber and indeed within the broader community. Some months ago, Mr. Speaker, I was a reluctant but very grateful guest in the wards of the Ulster Hospital. Injections, drips and regular medication were the main features of my 2-week stay. At least 25% of the medical and nursing staff who administered this treatment 24/7 were from overseas. I am saddened but can fully understand why some of these medical practitioners have expressed the view that they intend to take their skills elsewhere. I would appeal to all the overseas staff and our health and social care system not to leave. The community of which you and your families are valued members need you. You are outsiders, totally and completely one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by saying that it's important that we are here today and that my party was very glad to support the recall of this place. It's hard to find the words to describe what we've seen in the last week unfold in the capital city and elsewhere. The scenes of racist attacks, wanton destruction, outright hatred have been appalling, disturbing and plainly wrong. Last weekend, we saw nothing short of an explosion of hate on our streets, and it has shaken all of us. I hope that today is an opportunity for loud and unequivocal condemnation of that hate, and from every single politician and from every single party. That's the job of political leadership, and I hope that we meet it today collectively. Over the last week, far-right agitators have sought to cruelly and criminally exploit people, often our teenagers, for their own racist ends. Those agitators have shown the worst of our society. They have shown the dark underbelly of racist and fascist attitudes that still exist. They made me embarrassed and ashamed, Not just these elements, not that just these elements still exist, but also the fact that this is 2024. We still have a society where these kind of attitudes are allowed to fester and actually grow, where too many people still point to desperate people coming across on boats and dignities as the enemy. I know that the vast majority of us know that it is inequality, not immigration, that is the real enemy. And I was proud to stand in the Guildhall Square last night, a packed Guildhall Square, and listen to our mayor, our first citizen, giving a powerful, passionate speech against right-wing agitators. It was a message of hope, and it was powerfully delivered by our first black mayor. That gave me hope, because that's who we are. That's who Northern Ireland is, and we heard it loud and clear at those demonstrations. And that the barriers to housing or employment are not because of migrants or refugees, of whom, by the way, we take a staggeringly low share, but it is because of policy failure. Housing rights has been clear that the housing crisis particularly is not about migration, but by the devastatingly low levels of social housing that has been built. We need to get back to the facts in this public debate, and it is the job of all of us in this chamber to educate and inform, never to demonise. Speaker, in the face of this violence, many people are rightly asking themselves, what kind of society are we building for the next generation? I think it is also important today to say that it cannot be the one where this kind of behaviour is allowed to proceed or go unpunished or attitudes unchanged. And nor can it be one where we appeal to criminal gangs to use their influence to bring down tempers or to quell racist incidents. Some of the language that we have heard over the last week, as well as some of the silence that has taken place, has been misguided and has been sinister. In short, Speaker, it is my firm view that the people of Northern Ireland deserve so much better than this, and that the people of Northern Ireland are better than this. But unfortunately, I also know that as shocked as many were by the recent events in recent days, there are others, particularly from our minority communities, who will be less shocked. Less shocked because they have seen this pervasive and perverse hate before. They see it in their daily lives. And less shocked because they know the views that fuel the hate have for many years now been given credence and credibility by governments, particularly across the water. Governments that are more interested in stunts than solutions. There is no doubt rhetoric in recent years is coming home to roost. And the failure of government here is contributing to that crisis as well.
Member, give way.
I will.
Yeah, thank you. Would the member agree with me as well that the stop-go nature of politics here has impacted the delivery of many of the strategies which we can draw a direct line to some of the problems that we're facing today, and that we need to see the executive delivering on strategies, not just announcing them?
Members, next minute.
Absolutely, I totally agree with the member. So, and Lo, I and many others welcome the recall of the Assembly as the right thing to happen. But I know we will also want to hear more than warm words. And today I want to hear from the First and Deputy First Minister. I want to see progress towards swift agreement to the Refugee Integration Strategy, an update on the Racial Equality Strategy. We also want to see, and will play our part in ensuring strong accountability too in Westminster on this issue, to ensure that the new government there lives up to its commitments and overhauls the asylum system in a fair, compassionate and just way. As a society and political leaders, we will of course all have a job of work to do to deal with the root causes of racism, Islamophobia and xenophobia. Everywhere where we find it, we need to call it out. I would like to hear the First Minister's responses on how they have engaged with the PSNI in relation to its response last weekend, and how it will deal with issues moving forward, particularly given the possibility of more protests this weekend.
Members, time's up.
Although we recognise the PSNI's service
Members,
last weekend, Okay, many, including Amnesty International, have said that our police have questions to answer and why they did not stop those racists from attacking communities and businesses in apparent impunity. Thank you.
I certainly didn't envisage this would be the way to break myself into an Assembly debate, but at times we need to pull up our socks, go onto our feet and lead from the front. I rise to strongly condemn the violence we have seen in recent days. To be clear from the offset, the destruction of property and physical attacks on people have no place in Northern Ireland and have never had. Those responsible need to be brought to justice, regardless of the label they do it under or the organisation they stem from. I've taken multiple calls across North Antrim from businesses concerned at the potential risk to their employees and the effect on the business if workers decide to return home. Taking Rightbus in my constituency as an example, they employ over 2,000 people, and due to a local lack of skilled workforce, they have had to bring in 600 skilled workers from the Philippines. These workers come to Northern Ireland to work, they contribute financially to the country and integrate amongst their local community and neighbours. They should be made to feel very welcome to be here in Northern Ireland. Right across Northern Ireland, multiple sectors depend on foreign workers, and I appeal to those who take to the streets to exercise their right to protest, do so with this in mind. Mr. Speaker, I've come to the conclusion that one of the main problems people such as myself have with condemning the violence in this place, with some of the ones condemning the violence in this place, is actually the structures that exist here. The First Minister has said there is no alternative to IRA campaign. Let me remind the House what that means. No alternative to the murder of Thomas Niedermayer, a German industrialist who brought employment to Belfast only to be abducted, murdered and buried face down in the dump by the Provisional IRA. A horrific case which ultimately resulted in a number of his family members taking their own lives. You cannot say out of one side of your mouth that violence of recent days directed at immigrants was wrong, whilst out of the other side of your mouth defend the murder of a migrant who brought jobs to West Belfast. All murder was and is wrong. All violence was and is wrong. The very fact that there's people sitting in this place who cannot say that is a huge problem. I hear from people regularly who see that violence has worked for others in Northern Ireland, and now they believe that that is the only way for others to set up and take notice of the concerns they have. This is an argument I hear time and time again. I will never defend violence, but those in this House need to recognise and respect that people have a right to peacefully protest and express their concerns. Whether this House likes to hear it or not, there are legitimate concerns about legal and illegal immigration in Northern Ireland and throughout the rest of the United Kingdom. I welcome and refer to this statement from the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Ms Jones states the only way to stem the tide of violent disorder is to acknowledge what is causing it. She goes on to say the government must acknowledge what is causing the civil unrest in order to prevent it. Arresting people or creating violent disorder units is treating the symptom, not the cause. Honeyed words from this House, whilst ignoring the problems, won't make this issue go away. The people with legitimate concerns are fathers, their mothers, their grandparents, and it's simply wrong to brand them as far right, as many have tried to do. It is only right to acknowledge that tragic murders in Southport are the catalyst which sparked the current unrest, similar trouble to which we have seen in France and indeed in the Republic. Unchecked, unpoliced, illegal migration needs to be brought to an end. I have heard it repeatedly claimed that the number of people leaving Northern Ireland is greater than those coming here. Data published by the Northern Ireland Stats and Research Agency proves that claim is false. In fact, there was a net international flow of over 5,000 people in the year ending mid-2022. The reality is that many working class communities such as Harryville in my own constituency recognise the pressures on housing which immigration has played a factor in. Go ahead.
I thank the member for his intervention, and I wonder how you can put the housing crisis on migrants' feet when, in fact, it is politicians who are responsible for investment.
Members, next minute.
If the member had listened to say it played a factor, I didn't say it was solely the problem, but there are also greater pressures in my constituency. Seeing a doctor, seeing a dentist, something which, whether you like to admit it or not, that immigration has played a part in. There are pressures in schools. Immigration has been a factor, mainly due to a language barrier. Yes, years of underinvestment from this place within the departments have played a part in that. But burying your heads in the sand won't make this issue go away. My goodness, to all those rigorous implementers that we have in this House, who cheer every time that the protocol separates us further from the rest of the United Kingdom, including on immigration policy, they also have to take some responsibility for the mess we have found ourselves in. Moving forward, it's highly likely that Northern Ireland may face greater challenges ahead than the rest of the UK government, as that government looks to grapple with the issue in Westminster, while we in Northern Ireland are excluded
time is up.
from such measures as a result of the protocol.
Well, put on record my disgust at the brutal racist violence we have witnessed in recent days. I also want to extend solidarity to all the victims, to state that the far-right forces behind these attacks are in the minority, and to say that there are countless people here who are determined to stamp out racism, Islamophobia and bigotry of any kind. The scenes we've seen in recent days have been abhorrent. Certainly the experience of the weekend was that things could have been a lot worse if we did not have an organised anti-racist response to those who wanted to divide us. When a small far-right mob gathered at City Hall on Saturday, they were met with thousands of anti-racist campaigners. And I want to pay credit to every single campaigner who took a stand and is taking a stand against the hate of the far right. However, what we saw on Saturday was a group of violent thugs being given virtually free rein after the protest to attack migrants and migrant-owned businesses, and the PSNI have serious questions to answer on that front. The violence witnessed in recent days, Mr. Speaker, did not occur in a vacuum. The far right have been emboldened by the racism of those in power and who want to scapegoat migrants for their own failings. These are governments who have failed to build social homes, and some should listen to that point, have cut public services, kept wages down and punished working class people through brutal economic measures like the 2-child limit. Migrants, refugees or asylum seekers are not to blame. Deprivation wrought by successive Westminster and Stormont administrations is fertile ground for racist ideas to grow and fester. However, racism does not stem from working class communities. It is a top-down ideology that is created and fuelled by government policy. The Tories, who spent years attacking our communities, told us that people fleeing for their lives in small boats were the problem. They wanted us to focus on people who had nothing, whilst turning a blind eye to the wealthy who are hoarding ever-increasing amounts of obscene wealth. They caricatured migrants, asylum seekers and refugees and tried to strip them of their human rights with a disgraceful Rwanda bill. And Labour, Mr. Speaker, have continued with the Tories' hostile environment policy, which does condemn asylum seekers fleeing war, poverty and persecution to a life of misery here. And the measures designed to degrade and punish them for coming here happen here on this Executive's watch, which is tied to the hostile environment policy by a million threads. We see detention and deportation facilities like Lauren House operating under Stormont's nose. We have the Executive's failure to bring forward a racial equality strategy, and then people in this House wonder if we have a racism problem. Political choices which either ignore or pander to racism have led us to where we are today. And even now, after all the racist violence, there are elected representatives who still continue to give succour to far-right thugs who have loyalist paramilitaries in their ranks. They say these people have legitimate concerns. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing legitimate about racism, Islamophobia and hate of those who have coordinated and organised these attacks. It is a great irony, Mr. Speaker, that those who excuse racism and talk about so-called legitimate concerns are the same who have overseen the housing crisis, the crisis in our NHS, and much, much, much else. However, it would make an absolute mockery of us all if we were to listen to politicians who do refuse to build public homes, refuse to tackle sky-high rents, and who do the bidding of landlords at every single turn. Migrants are not the problem. We have a problem with landlords, a problem with underfunding, and a problem with a government that refuses to tackle the housing crisis. And working class unity, Mr. Speaker, working class unity is key to delivering on housing, overcoming poverty, and seeing investment in all of our public services. That's why we need to combine those struggles with the anti-racism struggle, because we are stronger together. We can only win together. And it will be up to us to stand up for one another, because the government and the police force have failed. I'll also offer a severe word of caution about the subsequent police response, Mr. Speaker. Young people who are incited to riot by loyalist paramilitaries do not need to be fired at with lethal plastic bullets, which should be banned. If the state wants to deal with rioting, they should deal with the paramilitary and far-right leaders who are orchestrating and organising this violence, but I won't hold my breath. So what we need, Mr. Speaker, is a mass anti-racism movement to reclaim our streets and isolate the far-right. We need working class people to unite against racism in their communities, in their workplaces, and everywhere it raises its ugly head. Stand up against racism. Don't give it any quarter, any truck. Solidarity.
Claire Sugden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an important message that we come together as an Assembly to unequivocally condemn the behaviour and racist motivation that we are watching unfold in Belfast and across the United Kingdom. First, I wish to remember 3 beautiful girls, Baby, Elsie and Alice, whose precious lives were taken by a man, a young man. And if there is any protest that we should all join, it should be to address the persistent violence against women and girls. It is not all men, and indeed men and boys are victims too. But when violence does occur, facts tell us the perpetrator is usually a man. And this is the crisis that we need to address, and I would ask Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom to reflect on that, rather than the misinformation that is clouding judgment on this issue today. I also wish to pay tribute to the community in Southport. We need to look to their example, that despite profound loss and a deep wound that will scar their community forever, they have remembered their babies with dignity. They do not want violence, and they do not want it in the name of those they loved. So those who are rioting, being abusive, don't dare claim it is for anyone but yourself. To those being targeted, I am so sorry that living here has made you feel scared, intimidated and unsafe. I'm horrified. I'm ashamed, as someone who is deeply proud to be from Northern Ireland, that this behaviour is being associated with my home place, your home place. Immigrants, ethnic minorities are not a community apart. You are our community. You are the doctors in our hospitals, the businesses that have provided jobs, the colour and culture that have enriched our lives, and the people targeting can only claim to live here. Let us all be very clear. The motivation of riots, not protest, riots, criminal damage, intimidation is racism. Those leading it are racists. Their raison d'etre is to whitewash our community. So if you're telling me you're not a racist, then don't try to justify the behaviour. Stop the whataboutery and stop standing with them. The vast majority of people in Northern Ireland are wonderful, welcoming people. Let's not allow this behaviour to represent us. Share your concerns, protest peacefully, contact your MLA, but not in the way that we are seeing. And I do acknowledge there are problems, but these problems were created by successive governments, or lack of, both in Stormont and Westminster. What sense or justification is there to destroy a business that creates jobs, serves the community and contributes to our economy? If you are frustrated because you cannot find a house, cannot access your GP, cannot heat your home because the government is planning to take away your subsidy, then don't blame those who are in the same position as you, because they are. The colour of their skin doesn't stop the very real problems of bad government and poor public services. If anything, it exacerbates them. And what we are seeing should be a stark warning to both the Northern Ireland Executive and the UK Government. You need to build confidence back in the people of Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. That starts with a programme for government action, resourcing our police force, building houses. Start listening to the people who elect us and start serving them accordingly. And it means nothing that the Union flag has joined with the Irish flag as a symbol of this behaviour. If anything, it justifies nothing and desecrates both. A criminal is a criminal, regardless of the flag they fly. Setting aside sectarianism for racism is not novel or something to be proud of. And paramilitaries don't exist for a cause or because they're concerned about you. It is entirely about them, whether to sell drugs, make money, or other forms of criminality. Those things are much easier when the police are distracted elsewhere. It is your community they're exploiting, and it's your children they're manipulating. I'm horrified seeing children in the middle of all the current violence, but sadly it isn't new. But I will remind parents that the criminal age of responsibility in Northern Ireland is 10 years old. Their cute smile won't save them, their primary school uniform won't save them. They will be criminals for the rest of their lives. And is that what we really want for them? Is that what we want for the future of Northern Ireland? Mr. Speaker, I stand against racism.
Call the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, and you have 15 minutes.
And can I welcome the fact that the Assembly has convened today and that we are very strongly united and standing firmly against the racism, the violence and the intimidation that we have witnessed over the past few days. I welcome the fact that we have many members in the gallery here today and many people at home watching on, looking for that strong political leadership at this time of violence and intimidation. I very much welcome the tone, I think, that's been set here by and large by most people in terms of the contribution to the debate itself, because racism is a stain in our society. There is a no to racism and no place for it in our society, and there's no excuse, there's no rationale, there's no justification. Racism is wrong in every single form. So to those people, I want to speak directly to those people that are inciting hatred in our society today. We see you, we reject your attitudes and your actions. To those that are involved in violence and intimidation, in causing chaos and destruction, you will be dealt with by the full force of the law. To those that are targeting our minority communities, stop now, because you do not speak for us, and you will never speak for us. The racism and violence that we have witnessed is in stark contrast to the values of equality and respect that this Executive and Assembly strives to promote and uphold. And that was reaffirmed earlier today whenever our four-party executive met. We see the devastating impact that these crimes have on victims. We've spoken to them. You all know them. They're your friends, they're your family, they're your community. We can see the devastation that's having, and our thoughts are with all of those people, but much more than that. They want to know that we have their back, that we're going to stand with them. Our healthcare workers are afraid to go to work. Our nurses are afraid to come home. Our mothers and families are afraid to take their children to a summer scheme. They're afraid to take their children to the park. Our young people are afraid to walk the streets. And that was a message that we heard loud and clear. And you're hearing that too from the people that you're engaging with. Certainly yesterday, whenever the Deputy First Minister and I met with the Racial Equality Subgroup, we heard that message. We met with business leaders business owners that were impacted yesterday evening, and we heard about their devastation and the support that they need. But make no mistake about it. Last week's activity, the activity this week, I called activity, the criminality that we have witnessed over the course of recent days was nothing more than raw racism, and it has to be addressed with a zero-tolerance approach. Officials from the Executive Office are engaging with colleagues across government departments, with Belfast Council, with agencies, with groups on the ground to explore how financial support can be provided to businesses damaged or impacted by the protests. The Executive will continue to implement the Racial Equality Strategy 2015 to 25, but also, as other members have indicated, we need to work towards moving to the next stage of that. And we acknowledge the work that's been done right across and the contribution from right across our minority ethnic community, not just to our economic life, but to our public and political and social and cultural life too. This is our community. Never lose sight of that. This is our community that we're talking about. We want to see all of our local businesses grow, not to be destroyed by acts of violence. And as the strategy itself acknowledged, we're under no illusion about the size of challenges that we have in terms of tackling racism and inequality, and that it will require time and effort and resources to be put in that direction. Additionally, it also recognises that each and every one of us has a responsibility to play our part in combating racism and racial inequalities by embracing the diversity that undoubtedly contributes to building a more vibrant and a more shared and a more equal society. Full implementation requires the support of everybody out there, all of us and all partners. So I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge all of the work that's been done by the voluntary and community organisations out there who work to combat racism, not just in weeks like this, at these horrendous times, but all year round, day in and day out, we commend your tireless efforts. The Minority Ethnic Development Fund is an example of the Executive's programme that supports the invaluable work of these organisations. And one of our key aims has been to establish dedicated structures to ensure racial equality is given a continued focus and that there is a strong link with our minority ethnic population. Under the Racial Equality Strategy, the subgroup was established to function as that strong voice within government, here on issues specifically affecting minority ethnic people, migrants and race relations. And that subgroup has a significant role to play in terms of supporting the delivery of the current priorities, but also, crucially, for steering where we go in the future and developing those future priorities. And we need to provide the best possible, I think the Chair of the Committee mentioned this, we need to provide the best possible legal protection that we can to highlight or to stand against racism and to highlight that was one of the key actions of the strategy itself. We have now completed that work in terms of the public consultation. That's now being completed, and the resulting report that was published this week will inform the basis of now how we move forward, what the next legislative change looks like, and it moves us a step forward and a step closer towards a more equal and safe society. And while it will remain a key priority to deliver fully the current racial equality strategy, it's so important that we get the post-2025 strategy right. So that's why I concur with the motion itself today in terms of bringing that forward as quickly as we possibly can. But the Executive also recognises the need to work collaboratively, including with that racial equality subgroup, with thematic groups, with the wider minority ethnic community out there and sector, to ensure that we have inclusive processes, that the conversations are had and we develop these things for how we move forward together. Officials are already engaging in anticipation of the expiration of the current strategy, and in addition to our racial equality strategy, the T-Book strategy represents our commitment to building a truly shared and united society, regardless of people's political, religious or ethnic backgrounds. And as recent events have highlighted, much more work needs to be done. And we're also very conscious of the fact that the fabric of society has changed since the launch of the T-Book strategy way back then. And on that basis, we've asked our officials to conduct a review of the strategy, including how to ensure that it meets the needs of our current society, the makeup of our society today. And it ensures that it's a truly inclusive strategy for everybody that calls this place their home, because that will be the success in it. I want to acknowledge the work of the PSNI and other bodies, as I said, during the current unrest, and to reaffirm our commitment to working together to deliver a shared, peaceful and inclusive society. And we're also acutely aware, as the Justice Minister mentioned, in terms of the resources issue. All of our public services have been decimated by 14 years of Tory austerity, and we are fighting back against that. And we want this new Labour government to turn the tide in terms of the austerity agenda that we've had for the last 14 years. We need properly funded public services. We had the Chief Constable at the Executive meeting this morning. We talked about the current situation as it's unfolding. We talked about the shared priority to tackle racism, to push back against racism, to have a zero-tolerance approach to intimidation and violence, and to push it back. And we will continue to work with the PSNI in terms of trying to achieve a better funding model for the police service, for our health system, for our education system and for all of our public services. People who have been displaced represent some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And we all have a responsibility to challenge prejudice and intimidation wherever we may see it. People seeking protection make significant contributions to our society, and we should value that. And I certainly value that. We value that. They bring with them a rich diversity of culture, along with new ideas and new approaches, and diversity is always going to be that strength. The publication of a Refugee Integration Strategy, therefore, remains a priority for us, to establish a clear framework through which we can collectively and successfully support two-way integration. And all of that work is best delivered through effective and properly resourced public services. And as I said, we're acutely aware of the underfunding situation when it comes to our public services, and we're committed to doing all that we can. And our Finance Minister, Kiva Archibald, is making the case for that fair funding model to the Treasury and will continue to do so. We will, of course, continue all of our efforts right across government and a wider society to tackle racism and inequality in all of its forms, which has been brought into sharp focus over the course of recent days. All of us here in this chamber, and people are looking to us for that political leadership, and I know that the people here want to provide that leadership, but we have to speak out and we have to confront hate. We must challenge the lies that fuel this type of activity. We have to challenge that and make it abundantly clear that there is no tolerance for racism, for hate, for discrimination, for intimidation, for violence, for criminality. I've covered some of the policy issues here this afternoon that the motion referred to. I could go into a lot more detail. But for me today is about sending that very strong message. It's about clarity of message coming from this elected body. It's about us sending that very strong message, in an unequivocal way, that we reject racism, that we send that message to you all today. So I started by speaking to those who are involved in criminal activity and violence and intimidation. So let me finish by speaking to those people that have been from an ethnic minority background who've been impacted by the events of recent days, and not just these recent days. This is something that's an underbelly in our society that we need to tackle. We say to you, your political leaders say no to racism. We say to you, your political leaders say no to intolerance, no to hate. We say to you, yes to an inclusive society. We say to you, yes to diversity. We say to you, you are our brothers and you are our sisters. We say to you, you are our community. And we say to you, we are one community. And I am determined to do everything that I can, and working with every single person elected to this chamber, to do all that we can to build that better society, that we choose hope over fear, and that we ensure that every child here has the best opportunity they have to flourish. And we say no to this malevolent, violent activity. We say no to racism. Let that be the only message that flows from this chamber today.
John Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be crystal clear. I utterly condemn the violence that has taken place on our streets and across the United Kingdom. No ifs, no buts. I want to express my sympathy for the families of Elsie, aged 7, Alice, aged 9, and Bibi, aged 6, who were so callously murdered in Southport. The violent scenes across the United Kingdom in the aftermath of these horrendous murders do nothing to honour their memory. Such actions are illegal, reckless, and counterproductive to the vital discussions we need to have about our country's immigration policies. There can be no doubt that the UK's long-term, uncontrolled immigration policy has sparked considerable concerns across this nation. Many citizens, myself included, feel that it is contributing to the considerable strain on our public resources. Ignoring these concerns is a huge disservice to the very people we claim to represent, regardless of background. These issues deserve proper scrutiny, political debate, and policy changes. But never, and I repeat, never, should they result in racist street attacks, whether that be in East, West, South Belfast, or across the United Kingdom. No. It is essential, therefore, to differentiate between opposing uncontrolled and illegal immigration and opposing immigration altogether. Most people support legal, controlled, and managed immigration. Our country has a proud history of welcoming those who seek a better life, who contribute positively to our society, who respect our laws and values. They are vital to sectors such as healthcare, as has been mentioned, where we rely heavily on the skilled professionals from abroad to maintain the quality of our services. Immigration, tailored to our country's specific needs, is both beneficial and necessary. Conversely, large-scale, uncontrolled immigration over a prolonged period of time is causing serious issues for local constituents. And I would be feeling them as an elected representative if I was not prepared to speak about them in this very place. I will in a moment. The additional strain, and I emphasise the word additional, strain on public services such as housing, school places, and council services cannot be ignored. I see this day in, day out as an elected representative. My first duty is to ensure our citizens' security, well-being, and prosperity. One of the most dangerous aspects of the current debate is the tendency for commentators and politicians to brand anyone who questions uncontrolled immigration and its contributing impact on society as far-right and racist. Members, the mother who has concerns about getting her child a school place is not far-right nor racist. The 25-year-old who cannot get housing in his local community is not far-right or racist. The elderly citizen who is angered that their winter fuel payment has been taken from them whilst £80 million a day is being spent to house asylum seekers inside hotels is not racist nor far-right, members. To label them as such is a mischaracterisation and stifles the constructive dialogue and alienates a large section of the population who have legitimate concerns. The current Westminster policy...
Would the member agree with me that the current Westminster government has much to do to develop policies to make a difference in this area?
I thank the member.
Members next.
It's an absolute critical point, because the current Westminster policy failures in relation to immigration have led to a situation where many people feel that their voice is not heard, nor their communities protected. Now, I understand I may speak from a different point of view than many members in this chamber, but it is better for me to say it in this place than people outside of this place to express it in a violent way which is unacceptable. We must channel this energy into meaningful dialogue and actions to address the underlying policy failures, whether that be weak border controls, underinvestment in key public services, low police numbers, and a UK-wide benefit system that continues to attract illegal immigration to the United Kingdom. We need a targeted immigration policy that deals with societal realities, grows our economy, and crucially enriches our country by representing and respecting its cultural identity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Kate Nicholl to wind on the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank members of the Muslim community for their presence here today, for their resilience and for their dignity. Some of what you have had to hear this afternoon will not have been easy. I want to acknowledge the fear that they and those from minority ethnic communities are living through. That should be our focus. And you have been let down, and collectively we need to do better. What has unfolded over the past few days has been shocking, unsettling, and very sad. It is hard to make sense of it. How did we get here? Was it 14 years of a Tory government and their hostile environment? Was it the newspaper headlines demonising the most vulnerable and platforming hostility as though it were a legitimate viewpoint? We know that there are dark forces at play on social media. How much of this was them? What impact has our failure to progress key pieces of legislation had? Our stop-start government, our financial instability? Is political hesitancy and at times silence in the face of hate crime to blame? Anna Lowe always said sectarianism and racism are two sides of the same coin. Has our inability to meaningfully tackle sectarianism, to have normalised suspicion and dislike of the other, been a driving force? My view is that all of this is true, wound together and set against a context of misinformation, disinformation, and inequality, and here we find ourselves, a complex path that has led us to a dark and frightening place. Thankfully, there are ways out of here, but we will need to grow together. As a first step, we must agree that the violence on our streets is unacceptable. We wholeheartedly condemn it, and those responsible must feel the full weight of the law, and members have been in agreement on this. Secondly, we need to name the problem. Those businesses that were attacked were owned by Muslims. The end point of the riots were the Belfast Islamic Centre. There is no ambiguity here. This was powered by racism and Islamophobia, and this motion states that. We need to focus on how we listen to the voices of those who have been impacted. Not one of us who has spoken here today has their lived experience. Those in fear need to be safe, and they need to be protected, and we must be visible to them and guided by their needs. The path from here gets harder. Tackling inequality is not easy. We have an insufficient budget and crises everywhere you look. Housing, poverty, health, education all need to be fixed. We need a properly resourced justice budget. There is legislation that is not far from completion on racial equality, refugee integration, anti-poverty. But the good news is the Assembly is up and running, we have ministers in place, we can get on with it, and we must. I feel very uncomfortable with the insistence of some to begin remarks by stating there are legitimate concerns, and I would like to read what the Victims Commissioner said. So-called legitimate concerns are never acknowledged when we have condemned examples of sectarian, hate crime, sexual assault or street violence in the past. It should therefore play no part in our messaging when we condemn violence against victims who are non-white.
Hear, hear.
I want to get on, but then I'll bring you in. There is a right to peaceful protest, and there are people who have concerns. These are, of course, true. However, there is no right to incitement. And while it may not be their intention, the result in qualifying your condemnation is to make those who feel targeted feel that politicians are prioritising the perpetrators over the victim. Legitimate concerns do not validate illegitimate protest. Protest outside today bears no equivalence to the one on Saturday. And I acknowledge that while the intent of the riots was rooted in racism, not all who attended were racist. And there are too many in our society from every walk of life who are struggling. This is the issue. Not immigration, not housing, and it is shameful to focus on that when there are victims sitting in this gallery who are living in fear right now, and we make it about housing policy. Housing policy is a failure of politicians, not of people who have a different religion or skin colour. Decades of deliberate misinformation will be hard to untangle. Across the world, there is a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment. Those with nothing, pitted against each other by those with everything. And here is where our leadership really matters. Here is where we have to be saying, this is misinformation. We have a moral duty to address the lies that people are being told, the manipulation, to stress that only 0.6% of the UK population are asylum seekers. 85% are refugees, are in developing countries. We need to be clear that Northern Ireland needs newcomers to grow. And please, can we stay away from the good versus bad migrant narrative. Just because you work in a hospital does not make you better than an asylum seeker. We are all human beings. We all have worth. We all have value. Our diversity does make us richer. And we need to tap into the warmth and the empathy that our people possess in volume. That empathy and compassion that is sometimes hard to access because of poverty, because of failure for our public services to meet their needs. But these are two separate conversations. We are here about racist crime, Islamophobia. We will have another conversation about housing. Please do not conflate them. It is negligent to do so. It's dangerous to do so. Our views on politics and history and economics and the constitutional question will vary. But I really hope that today one thing we can agree on is that we are all united in our desire to make this place a better one, where everyone, regardless of their religion, their race, can feel safe, can be happy, and can lead a good life. I want to finish, Mr. Speaker, by reading the words of Mohammed Atif, who is in the gallery. He's from the Belfast Multicultural Association, and he spoke to us on the stairs outside, and I think it's right that we end with his words. He says, "We must reflect on the message we are sending to our children. What kind of society do we want them to inherit? Is it one where division and intolerance thrive, or one that celebrates diversity and unity? We have witnessed failures from authorities and politicians in adequately protecting Muslim and immigrant communities, and now they have the opportunity to correct this. It is imperative that today you send a resounding message of solidarity, that we stand united against racism, Islamophobia, and discrimination in all forms. We urge every citizen of Northern Ireland to embrace our diversity and recognise it as a strength. Together, let us build a future where everyone, regardless of their background, skin colour, and religious beliefs, feels valued and safe. The time is now to affirm our commitment to inclusivity, making Northern Ireland a welcoming home for all." And he asks, will you promise me this? Will you promise this to yourself? Will you promise this to our next generations? Thank you.
The question is that the amendment standing in the name of Brian Kingston and Jonathan Buckley be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Clear the lobbies. The question will be put in 3 minutes. Order. Members will resume their seats. Order. Question is that the amendment standing in the name of Brian Kingston and Jonathan Buckley be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. No. Do we have tellers? Order. Order. Tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Tom Buchanan and Brian Kingston. Teller for the noes, Andrew McMurray and David Honeyford. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left. Secure the doors. Order! Order, members, please take their seats. Clerk, please read the result.
71 members voted, 28 members voted aye, 43 members voted no. The amendment therefore falls.
The amendment falls. The amendment falls. The item on the order paper then is the motion, and I put the motion to you to be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Item 3 on the order paper, the adjournment. The question is, the Assembly now adjourned? The Assembly is adjourned.
Assembly Chamber.